All right, I think we are good to go. If it's all right with you, Mr. Chair, I can just do a brief introduction. So thank you everyone for joining us this evening. We do have our full planning committee here this evening with us. Joining us from staff are Tim Park, Director of Planning Services, James Barr, Manager Development Approvals, Amy Didrikson, Intermediate Planner, Ricardo Peggi, Planner. We also have Blair Johnson joining us as host, and I am Elizabeth Fawcett. I am the committee clerk for the planning committee. We also have 3 or 4 applicants and agents with us at the moment to help us through with presentations for this evening's files. And we currently have 5 members of the public joining us in the gallery. With that, Mr. Chair, I'll turn it over to you to kick us off.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Madam Chair. And before we move into formal proceedings, I was actually hoping to say a quick word about process tonight, especially for the benefit of members of the public, and then ask our Director of Planning to further that. So very briefly from me, just to note that we have 3 public meetings where we will not be making decisions. We'll simply be hearing information from the applicants mainly, and then questions and answers from the public with some questions also from committee. And that's just the first of steps in seeing these files through. So Mr. Park, maybe you could talk a bit more technically before I read the notice of collection about how this all unfolds for folks.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair, I'd be pleased to. So the purpose of tonight's meeting, the public meeting, is a statutory requirement under the Planning Act. Every application is required to hold a public meeting at which comments from the public are received, and the public has the opportunity to make comments on the proposal or ask questions of the applicant regarding their proposal. It also allows committee members to ask questions of the applicant regarding their proposal. At this point in time, the report that is before Planning Committee is really just an information report outlining what the applicant has applied for in terms of variances. No recommendations are being made in this public meeting report for committee's consideration, and committee will not be making any recommendations this evening regarding the report. At the same time this is going on, the application is going through a technical review process which involves the review of the proposal by various departments at the City of Kingston, along with partnering agencies and boards and commissions for any input that they have regarding the application. Staff are present this evening from Planning Services to listen to the questions and the comments from the public and Planning Committee, and will be recording these questions and comments. Those questions and comments will be addressed in a future report known as the Comprehensive Planning Report, which will be brought back to Planning Committee. That report is the report that contains recommendations by Planning Services and is up for consideration by Planning Committee for approval. The basis of those recommendations are based on a review of the application against official plan policies, provincial policy statements, and comments and feedback received from city departments, agencies, boards, commissions, as taking into account comments received from the public and the committee. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Park. And so to supplement that, I will read the formal language that we call notice of collection, which is on the 2nd page of your agenda if you're following along. And it just gives a bit more information about how members of the public in particular can participate. So it goes like this. Personal information collected as the result of this public meeting and process is collected under the authority of the Planning Act and will be used to assist in making a decision on this matter. All names, addresses, opinions, and comments may be collected and may form part of the minutes, I should say, which will be available to the public. Questions regarding this collection should be forwarded to the Director of Planning Services. The purpose of the public meeting is to present the planning applications in a public forum and to give the public an opportunity to make representations in respect of the proposals as required by the Planning Act. Following presentations by the applicant, the meeting will be open to the public for comments and questions. Persons speaking at the meeting are requested to give their name and address for recording in the minutes. Additionally, interested members of the public can email the committee clerk or the assigned planner if they wish to be notified regarding a particular application. No decisions are made at public meetings concerning applications. The exception to this rule is combined reports, which consolidates public meetings and comprehensive reports. These applications are deemed by staff as straightforward and routine. Public meeting reports are provided to inform the public of all relevant information. After the meeting tonight, staff will be considering the comments made by the public in their further review of the applications. When this review is completed, a comprehensive report will be prepared, making a recommendation for action to this committee. The recommendation is typically to approve with conditions or to deny. This committee then makes a recommendation on the applications, the council, I should say, who has the final say on the applications. Following a council decision, this will be circulated in accordance with the Planning Act. If a person or public body would otherwise have an ability to appeal the decision to the Council of the Corporation of the City of Kingston to the Ontario Land Tribunal, but the person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make a written submission to the City of Kingston before the bylaw is passed, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision. So with that context, I'll call to order our first public meeting, which is concerning 1201, 1214, and 1301 Woodhaven Drive, and hand it to staff for opening comment, and then after that to the applicant for a presentation.
Sorry, just bear with me 1 second. Thank you. So here to introduce the application for a rezoning. I want to confirm to you that notice was given in accordance with the Planning Act as detailed in the public meeting report. Staff did not receive any correspondence with respect to the application prior to the public meeting as of now. This is a statutory public meeting held under the Planning Act, the purpose of which is for the applicant to present their proposal to the public and planning committee and answer questions from the committee and the public. As part of this public meeting, planning staff has prepared a public meeting report summarizing the proposal. It should be noted that no recommendations or decisions for the proposal are being proposed. Planning staff are in attendance this evening to record the questions being asked of the applicant or to address technical questions regarding the planning process. Feedback received will be addressed by planning staff within a future comprehensive report once technical review of the application is complete and staff are ready to make a recommendation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clendenning. And we'll look now to the applicant to walk us through the proposed, provisions for this site.
Thank you and good evening. Mr. Chair, can you hear me?
Well and clear, after you.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Zuko Leclerc. I'm a planner with FO10 Planning and Design. Here presenting an application for zoning bylaw amendment at 1201, 1214, and 1301 Woodhaven Drive on behalf of the property owner, Tamarack Cataraqui West Corporation. Next slide, please. These lands are located in the west end of the city of Kingston. They're in the Cataraqui West Master Plan neighborhood. They are in an area that is predominantly residential. However, they do back onto Collins Creek, a provincially significant wetland and environmentally protected area. There are a range of uses within the area, predominantly residential, but there are some commercial uses further south, as well as commercial uses planned within the Cataraqui West Master Planned area. There are also a number of public parks nearby and some schools planned in close proximity to the site. Next slide, please. The lands themselves have been the subject of a number of previous approvals going back to 2009 when they were draft approved for a subdivision. The total land area is approximately 18.8 hectares. It's just under 19 hectares. And as noted, it's part of a master plan community. Previous phases have been built further south, most recently phase 2.1 as part of this particular subdivision, but there have been a number of other subdivisions nearby, all sort of moving along, fulfilling the intent of the master plan and secondary plan. Next slide, please. These lands are designated in the official plan under the Cataraqui West secondary plan. You can see that on this slide here. Most of the lands are designated low density residential. That's the yellow color that you see. There's two small areas of the site that are also designated medium density residential. That's that orange hatch that you see on the right of the screen. These designations both impose and require minimum and maximum density ranges. So they effectively provide for a range of built forms within a range of densities. There is a considerable overlap between the density ranges permitted in both designations, but fundamentally the low density designation has a lower minimum and the medium density designation has a higher maximum. Next slide, please. The current zoning on these lands is a bit of a patchwork. There has been a number of applications over the years. The original zoning applied to the lands is shown on this slide here as the R232 and R233 zones. Since then, there have been a number of other site-specific spot zones applied, which have amended provisions in accordance with market expectations or demands. And those spaces were not developed at that time. They were effectively reserved for future development, and conditions have changed. So there's a bit of a patchwork, as I said, which fundamentally is the reason for the application this evening. Next slide, please. This sort of the array of zones that apply to these lands have made it complicated for home builders, and they complicate the building permit process, and they just make things a little bit more difficult than they need to be. So the applicants are looking to rezone these lands to one standard zone, which effectively is adapting the most recently zoned lands in Woodhaven or Cataraqui West, which are just to the east. You can see those on this slide, actually the R2-50 zone being the most recent zone applied in Woodhaven, adapting that particular zone to these lands and introducing a few more adjustments in part due to the site-specific considerations that are reflected in some of these spot zones in these lands, as well as to standardize with other zones and adjust some performance standards. So I'll very briefly speak to some of the adjustments that are being sought in particular in this instance. One is a reduction in the rear yard from 6.75 to 6 meters, standardizing a minimum interior side yard requirement of 1.2 meters on one side and 0.6 on the other, adjusting exterior side yards to 2.4 meters. In terms of the area specific performance standards, the previous zones that have applied to these lands had applied a separate zone for lands that abutted onto Collins Creek and the open space lands there. The effect of which was simply to add an additional performance standard. So rather than applying a wholly different zone to those lands, the proposed zone would simply apply a different standard for lots that have the condition of backing onto those lands. Very similarly, a separate performance standard for lots that back onto the Trans-Northern gas pipeline, which bisects the lands sort of a third of the way north, would also be applied. And finally, and the most significant deviation from the other performance standards in the R250 zone is a request for a site triangle requirement of 3.5 by 3.5 meters. Next slide, please. This slide is just showing it's showing the lands themselves as well as identifying all of the intersections. So the lands are shown outlined in red. The blue dots represent the intersections within the subdivisions. This slide is also identifying the number of applications that have applied specifically to these lands. The draft approval back in 2008, and then 3 rezonings since then. The site triangle reduction that's being sought is not being sought lightly. There was a traffic study done, and an engineering consultant reviewed the site triangle request and found that given the nature of the roads within these lands, these are all local roads with a standard road width of 20 meters. Examining the geometry of the roads, geometry of the intersections, the traffic study concluded that a 3.5 meter by 3.5 meter site triangle would provide suitable and safe intersection characteristics throughout these lands, which is why that's reflected in the zoning bylaw amendment. Next slide, please. So the overall intent of this application is to simplify the zoning, standardize it throughout these lands, consolidate it effectively, make life easier for the home builders, for future property owners, for city staff reviewing applications. It is consistent with the provincial policy statement, as well as the official plan and the secondary plan, and it is our opinion that this represents good land use planning. And with that, Mr. Chair, I welcome any questions or comments from yourself, the committee, and the public.
Thank you very much, Mr. Leclerc. What we will do then is turn it to the public first, as this is a public meeting. So if anyone is there, the clerk will indicate that to us. And if you do speak from members of the public, please give us your full name and address for recording on the record. And you'll have 5 minutes to speak. And we'll do 2 or 3 or 4 members of the public, depending on how many people are here, and then pause and have the applicant reply to the questions that you've asked. And if there are anyone who would like to speak after that, then we can do another round of questions from the public, and then we'll go to committee. So Madam Clerk, do we have anyone who would wish to speak?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you, I'm just going to ask those who are joining us this evening, if you wish to speak to the file that is currently on the floor, you will need to raise your hand in Zoom. This is found in the center of the Zoom window when you move the mouse over your screen. And I'm just going to give a couple seconds here, Mr. Chair, to see if we get any hands. And if there's anyone who wishes to speak to the application, ask questions, or provide feedback, if you could please raise your hand in Zoom. Mr. Chair, we're not getting any hands.
All right, thank you. So we will go to committee. I also wanted to recognize that Councillor Stroud has joined us. Councillor Stroud, you're free to participate at any point after the initial committee members have asked their questions. So welcome to Planning Committee. I saw Councillor Chappelle's hand up. Would you like to go first?
Sure. Thank you, Councillor Kiley, Mr. Chair. A number of questions that come to mind for me with this proposal is the Collins Creek significant wetland. You're proposing 12-meter setback from the last fencing. And being a significant wetland, I'm not sure how the southern portion of this development has managed to encroach so closely, but having walked there, it looks like residents tend to continue to want to get closer and encroach onto that wetland. And so I would ask the developer to consider increasing the distance from that wetland and make it, maybe market it as a ecologically sensitive development and with premium lots with much larger capacity to have that green space behind that property. And that would be something I would like to see. So that's my first comment. So I guess to frame that as a question, is that something you could bring back to the developer and perhaps ask them to consider that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is certainly the case. I will take that to the developer. I will note as well the conditions of this draft plan approval and the circumstances of the approval itself. The environmentally protected area of the Collins Creek wetland is separated from the residential lands by an open space designated land. That is, I suppose the way I would describe it is it was deemed to be somewhat less sensitive than the protected wetland, and serves as a bit of a buffer between the residential lands and the environmentally protected area. And in addition to that, property owners within the lots that back onto that that open space buffer are subjected to more stringent requirements in terms of severe restrictions on ability to cut trees, limiting the types of accessory buildings or structures that can be placed in the rear yard and within a certain distance. So there are a number of additional and enhanced protections along there, but I certainly will take that feedback back to the developer.
And then my other question is with regards to Woodhaven. I probably have 3, if not a dozen calls a week about horrendous parking in this development south of Cataraqui Woods Drive, especially from Buckhorn down to Woodhaven Drive to like south of Cataraqui Woods on Woodhaven. We're supposed to be introducing public transit to this area. And I'd like to understand if if the developer would consider taking 1 or 2 of these small lots and having them as public parking access points to remove vehicles off of the roadway. If that would be something worth consideration. I know it takes money out of the development, but we end up intensifying the developments. We've got a number of residents that have now secondary dwellings. We have real estate agents that sell these dwellings as semis and investment properties, and it creates 4 to 5, sometimes 6 vehicles per physical household, which creates parking chaos. And I can't support further development like that because this is a nightmare and it's really poor planning. So is that something you can take back to the developer? Like look at this as being a premium opportunity to have less dense on that main thoroughfare of Woodhaven.
Mr. Leclerc.
Mr. Chair. These lands have already been draft approved. So they have been approved by council for residential development in the formats and sort of the lot configurations that I've shown throughout the presentations. Certainly that doesn't mean that adjustments don't occur through the final plan of subdivision and the detailed design exercise that follows draft approval. The lands that you see are generally lower in density than some of the areas, I think, south of Catwoods Drive. If I recall correctly, there's a greater density threshold along some of those lands. But to the councillor's question, is there an opportunity through this particular zoning bylaw amendment to facilitate the permission to do off-site parking or sort of a communal parking use? That's certainly something that we can explore. I can take back to my client and we can discuss with staff.
Thank you. Those are the 2 questions I had, and I appreciate your presentation this evening.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other committee members? Questions? Councillor Osanik.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, a question to Mr. Leclerc, and just following the lines of Councillor Chappelle's questions. My questions are about the backyards. So because these backyards that back onto the Collins Creek Environmental Protection Area and those adjacent lands that you were referring to, right? It looks like some backyards are 6.75 meters and some are 6. And so what's proposed is a uniform 6 meters. Does that mean that the backyards that were originally going to be 6.75 meters and now going to 6 meters, like, does that mean that they're going to be going more like further into the adjacent lands?
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. Not quite. The proposed zoning would have 3 different effective rear yard setbacks. The 6 meter is what's being sought for the majority of the lands. For lands that back onto the gas pipeline, those properties would actually have a 7 meter rear yard setback. And for any lands that back onto that open space buffer adjacent to the Collins Creek wetland, those properties would have a 12 meter setback. So they would have double the setback of a typical lot, along with additional restrictions on what can occur within that setback.
Okay, great, thank you. And my other question is just about the Trans-Canada Northern Pipeline. When the developer will be selling the homes, the homeowner will get a warning about the pipeline. Is that right? It will be like part of the homeowner's guidebook that each homeowner will get for the ones backing onto the pipeline?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct. This subdivision does have a requirement that a homeowner's handbook be provided to all property owners. It includes information for property owners that back onto the open space about what they can and can't do, and best practices and what activities that they should or shouldn't be doing. For property owners that will back onto the gas pipeline, it will notify them as well as advise what they can or cannot do and who they can contact should they seek to do anything on the property within that would trigger a review by the pipeline.
Thank you. And then my final question is, if somebody was to then buy that house, like one of those homes, and they get that guidebook, but then they put their property up for sale, then how does the new owner get find out about the restrictions? Like definitely, to do something next to the pipeline would be bad, but I also care equally as much about the houses backing onto the open space because I want them to know no sheds and, they can't cut down the trees that might be left along there.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I know that the warnings around the pipeline are also factored into the subdivision agreement, and there are considerations for warning clauses to be made so that property owners be made aware, which are registered on title, not only sort of given to the future owner, they're registered onto the property. The homeowners handbooks are also available through city staff. So should property owners seek to inquire, for example, if there's reference to a homeowners handbook in the subdivision agreement and they weren't provided one, they can always obtain one from city staff.
Okay, thank you. And then that just leads into my very last question, because I just remembered one more question. For the homes backing onto the open space, Mr. Leclerc, right? Is it, we are like the developers putting up a fence? Is that right? I remember when we had all the secondary plan discussions, I think that was the vision for the homes backing onto the open space. They would have a fence.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is the case. This developer was just completed the first phase of lots that back onto the wetland, or is close to completing the first phase, I guess, with completion plan for this spring. And there is a requirement that a fence be constructed at the rear of the property lines and that no gates can be permitted in that fence.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other takers for this file? Okay, seeing none, I'd ask Councillor Hill to take the chair. I have one follow-up question.
Take the chair and recognize you.
Thanks so much. Mr. Leclerc, I just wanted to follow up on a question from Councillor Chappelle. In one of your responses, you mentioned that this subdivision is proposed to be less dense than one south of, I forget the intersecting road. Could you clarify what you mean by that? Because I don't see how that's possible given some of the provisions requested here.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. The zoning that's proposed would facilitate sort of the maximum density that is traditionally been built in Woodhaven. The draft plan of subdivision, however, reflects a less dense lot fabric than what you see south of Cataraqui Woods Drive for the most part, particularly in that there are not a lot of lands in this development that are zoned or designated for medium density. There's very little. I did note that there is a higher range for, there is an overlap between the low and medium density ranges, but that overlap would allow a mix of single detached, semi-detached in towns, but it would not allow a high concentration of townhouses or semi-detached dwellings in these lands. So effectively, although a higher density is enabled by this zoning, the official plan would not allow sort of the maximum densification of these lands under that zone.
All right, supplemental to that, the reason that I'm confused is I thought that this developer sold lots based on size, not based on the model of the home, and it was up to the person purchasing that would choose what they put on that property. So that's why I just don't quite grasp why what you just said could be true.
Mr. Chair, ask just for just a little clarification on that question.
Yeah, so I thought these were if this goes through, these would be lot sizes of say 45 feet or 36 feet, and then the individual person who bought that then gets Tamarack to build a type of house on it based on the size of the lot. Is that not how this works?
Through Mr. Chair, that is correct. The lot sizing specifically is set through is permitted by the zoning. So the zoning would allow a lot size for single attached dwellings as low as 9 meters, which is effectively the standard sort of minimum lot size that you see for single attached homes. Mm-hmm. The draft plan is subdivision that is enabled by the zoning that was originally proposed a range of lot sizes from as low as 9 meters to 15 meters. So there was quite a range of actual lot frontages being proposed. What this developer generally does, and this subdivision is sort of jointly developed by two home builders generally. They do market properties based on lot frontage. Those lot frontages are established through the final plan of subdivision. So in creating and in finalizing the subdivision lands, they will set the frontages that are ultimately brought to market. And then those are the lots that are effectively that are become available, and homeowners can buy a lot and choose certain models that fit to that particular frontage. But homeowners, for example, would not have the opportunity to say that they want a particular lot size at a particular location if that wasn't what the draft plan of subdivision had enabled.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you very much. Councillor Hill, may I take the chair back?
I return the chair. Sorry about that.
No problem. All right, seeing no other hands waving. Oh, I do. Sorry, Councillor Hutchison, after you.
Sorry, I just want to clarify. Is this, given the type of dwelling unit that you're suggesting, the changes in the zoning, does this, it's a bit confusing to me. Does this proposal increase the density or not for that is allowed on this property?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the zoning, the minimum lot frontage that's being proposed through this particular application is not substantially different than the zoning that currently applies to these lands. So the density that's being proposed is not fundamentally different. What we're effectively asking to do is to standardize it and remove all the different spot zones and just apply one zone. Right now, I think there's 5 or 6 or 7 zones that all enable more or less the density that is currently enabled by the zone. Now, the zoning is an enabling type of provision. It allows a lot frontage as low as a particular number. It does not set a maximum. So lot frontages can be between 9 meters and a higher number. The maximum lot frontage is effectively set by the density ranges in the official plan, which are enforced by staff through the final plan of subdivision approval process. So this particular zoning is not fundamentally proposing to change the density in these lands. That's already been set by the current zones. What we're really looking to do is simplify the zoning itself.
Right, I understood the request. So what is the density currently on this property?
That density range in the official plan, through Mr. Chair, is 14 to 45 units per net hectare in the low density designation, and it's 25 to 75 units per net hectare in the medium density designation. The current subdivision proposes around the draft approved plan of subdivision from 2008 proposed a given density. That density has been varied through the final plan of subdivision process. So the plan that was draft approved in 2008 set the general expectations for development in this subdivision. Phase 1 was built and subdivided into different phases. Phase 2, stage 1 was built, and those phases, as they were registered, as they were finalized, there were some tweaks and adjustments, and the lot frontages changed a little bit. from what was originally draft approved. Not substantially, no, not major alterations, but some slight fluctuations, which means the unit counts increase by 1 or 2 or 3, or they decrease by 1 or 2 or 3, depending on market conditions at the time of final plan of subdivision. So the zoning is really enabling that flexibility. The draft plan of subdivision enables a certain density and demonstrates that the land can be developed in accordance with the official plan, but the actual implementation and insurance that those lands are developed in accordance with the official plan is done at the final plan of subdivision registration stage. Now, that's not fundamentally what we're seeking to discuss today. Of course, the proposal here is to sort of simplify the zoning to maintain the level of flexibility and really make it easier for everyone's staff and the homeowners and the home builders to understand what their zoning requirements are so that they can achieve that.
So what is the density of the phase 1 of this subdivision?
Mr. Chair, I don't have that figure handy. I can certainly ensure that that information is available to staff in preparing the final comprehensive report. We do have that information available. We do track the density in these lands as the phases are built. So we have that information. So I just don't have it at my fingertips.
Right, and when they're asking for a change in the dwelling, asking for a change allowing for linked dwelling house, does it mean that they are intending to establish townhouse development?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the zoning that's proposed would allow townhouses as well as semi-detached dwellings, single detached dwellings, and a linked dwelling. So a linked dwelling would be a different form. It's very similar to a semi-detached dwelling, except that instead of having a shared wall, it would have a shared foundation. Whereas townhouses and semi-detached dwellings both have shared walls, with townhouses, of course, having middle units where walls are shared on both sides instead of just one.
It would appear as a duplex.
It would read more like a duplex, correct?
Okay, so my questions are entirely about how the city is trying to increase density and the amount of housing available. I appreciate that the developer wants to be efficient with the land use here, and that's how I read this proposal. But I'm wondering, in terms of what the city's needs are, how this proposal will help the city reach its housing needs, other than just building other units. Density.
I might be able to toss that to staff. I'm not sure if the applicant will be speaking about overall city policy. Perhaps Mr. Park would like to field that.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. If I understood the question correctly, Councillor Hutchison is asking how the application will address the city's increase of housing and density policies. That will be addressed in the comprehensive report as it is brought forward, and if it meets or is not meeting those policies.
Great, that's fair enough. I was just asking the planner for the applicant what their perception is of what this is going to result in. That's Mr. Leclerc.
In terms of density for the site, is that correct, Councillor Hutchison? Just to do the business at hand, that's what I'm trying to get at here.
Yeah, the applicant is asking for some changes in zoning. Economically, I understand why they would want to do that. And that might be fair enough. But my question is also, what is it relates to what Mr. Park was talking about, intensification policy, and what the city will get in return. That's my question. And I've asked about the density of the phase 1 because I think it's pretty darn low.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I can say definitively that all of the densities that have been developed in this subdivision have been in accordance with the official plan. So prior to any phase being registered, the applicant is required to demonstrate to staff satisfaction that the density in the final registered plan aligns with the secondary plan and the ranges within the medium or low density designation. So that is the case in all of the phases that have been developed thus far in this subdivision. There has been a trend towards greater density broadly in Woodhaven and in Cataraqui West. The zoning amendment that's before this committee, though, would not change the conditions. The lot frontages that are being proposed are about as tight as you can make a subdivision lot. 9 meter single attached, 7.5 meter semi-detached, or a 6.1 meter townhouse lot is about as efficient as you can get. And it's the standard that is these are the standards that are more or less applied generally throughout Kingston. They are a minimum requirement though. So the official plan is sort of the tool that allows staff to push for greater density, generally speaking. The zoning allows the highest density effectively for these types of uses already in these lands. We're just proposing to make it easier to read the zoning bylaw so that property owners and when home builders are looking for building permits and their property that they're looking to get a permit for, it falls among 2, maybe 3 zones. They don't have to worry about trying to figure out which zone conditions apply, what provisions apply. They'll just have one standard zone that applies to these lands and they'll be able to read that very easily. So the density is not fundamentally going to be altered. It's already as high as it can be in this zone for these types of uses.
Okay, I think I made my point. Okay.
All right, thank you, Councillor Hutchison. Last call for questions on this file. Madam Clerk, out of courtesy to the public, we didn't have anyone initially, so I'm comfortable giving an opportunity now if any members of the public have joined since and would like to ask a question to the applicant.
Sure, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And through you, we do have 5 members of the public present. If there's anyone who wishes to speak to the current file, if you could please raise your hand in Zoom so that we may call on you. Do one final call. If there's anyone who wishes to speak to this file before it is closed, if you can please raise your hand in Zoom. We do not have any hands, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Fawcett. Thank you, Mr. Leclerc. We'll look forward to the comprehensive report for debate on this at another time. And we'll move to the next public meeting, which is for 231 Albert Street. And to start that, we'll have city staff introduce the file.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. I can confirm that notice was provided in accordance with the Planning Act as detailed in the public meeting report. We have received 4 pieces of correspondence in writing through email that are included in the addendum package. This is a statutory public meeting held under the Planning Act, and the purpose is for the applicant to present their proposal to the public and the planning committee and answer questions from the committee and members of the public. As part of this public meeting, planning staff has prepared a public meeting report summarizing the proposal. It should be noted that no recommendations or decisions are being made this evening regarding this report. Planning staff are in attendance this evening to record the questions being asked of the applicant or to address technical questions regarding the planning process. And feedback received will be addressed by planning staff within the future comprehensive report once the technical review of the application is complete and staff are ready to make a recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we'll move to the applicant's planner. And just before I do, Councillor Hutchison, you are still on mute. Do you mind muting yourself there? Thank you, sir. Okay, over to the applicant's planner.
Thank you and good evening. Through you, Mr. Chair. My name is Golsa Kirmagaram from Fulton Planning and Design, representing the owner of the property at 231 Albert Street, Mr. Jeff McCord. The application is for zoning bylaw amendment for the property at 231 Albert Street. Next slide, please. The site is located in the Sunnyside neighborhood within proximity to transit routes, parks, and open spaces, schools, and downtown. Primary uses in this area are residential and institutional. Building heights in the neighborhood generally range from 1.5 to 3 stories. Many properties in the proximity of this site contain detached accessory structures located in the rear yard. Next slide, please. The site is currently developed with a 2-story duplex dwelling and has an area of approximately 814 square meters with 16 meters of lot frontage on Albert Street. Vehicular and pedestrian access is provided from Albert Street. Next slide, please. The property is designated residential in the official plan and is located within a housing district. Residential designation is intended to accommodate fully serviced residential uses and a wide range of building forms to support the full range of housing needs. It promotes intensification within a settlement area to optimize the use of the services, and any new development or redevelopment must be compatible with surrounding land uses and meet functional needs of the users. Next slide, please. The property is currently zoned 1-family dwelling and 2-family dwelling zone A in zoning bylaw 8499. Permitted uses in the A zone include 1- and 2-family dwellings and a variety of community-related uses. Minimum lot area is required to be 370 meters per unit, and maximum lot coverage shall be 33.3%. And the minimum rear yard depth is 7.5 meters. As a general provision, all accessory buildings within the A zone must have a maximum height of 4.6 meters and minimum yard setback of 1.2 meters. Next slide, please. Provincial policy statement promotes efficient and resilient development and land use patterns by accommodating an appropriate, affordable, and market-based range and mix of residential types, including additional residential units and multi-unit housing, promoting the integration of land use planning, growth management, transit supportive development, intensification, and infrastructure planning to achieve cost-effective development patterns, optimization of transit investments, and standards to minimize land use consumption and servicing costs, and applying appropriate development standards which facilitate intensification, redevelopment, and compact form while avoiding or mitigating risks to public health and safety. Next slide, please. This proposal seeks to allow the construction of a detached 1-story duplex dwelling with a raised basement in the rear yard. The site is currently developed with a 2-dwelling unit, which is proposed to remain unchanged. Pedestrian and vehicular access to the existing and proposed building will be provided from Albert Street. In addition to private amenity area within each unit, the proposed development will provide approximately 332 square meters of outdoor amenity area, as well as 4 parking spaces, 3 of which will be located on a paved area within the existing and proposed buildings. 1 of the parking spaces will be provided in the front of the existing building. The parking spaces will be accessed from a paved driveway from Albert Street, and 4 bicycle parking spaces will be provided on site. An unobstructed 1.2 meter wide path of travel will be provided for pedestrian access from Albert Street to the private entrance. And the new duplex is sized in accordance with the requirements of for accessory buildings in terms of height, lot coverage, and yard setbacks. Next slide, please. Here is the front elevation of the new duplex building. Next slide, please. The new duplex will be designed so that there will be a 3-bedroom unit on the main floor and a 3-bedroom unit on the basement with a shared entrance facing the front of the property. Next slide, please. The proposed zoning bylaw amendment is to apply a site-specific one-family dwelling and two-family dwelling zone A to permit two-unit dwellings as an additional permitted use, to permit a minimum lot area of 810 square meters for 4 dwelling units and a rear yard setback of 6 meters and a lot coverage of 36%. Next slide, please. It is our opinion that this is good land use planning as it proposes use and as the proposed use is compatible with surrounding area and proximity to transit routes, schools, parks, and open spaces supports intensification at this location. It is consistent with the provincial policy statement and it conforms to the official plan as a compatible form of residential intensification. Next slide, please. So if there's any questions or comments, I'd be happy to answer. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much for your time and the presentation. Madam Clerk, do we have anyone from the public who would wish to ask questions to the applicant?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you, we do already have one hand up. Just a reminder to those who are joining us this evening that we do rely on the raise hand function. If you wish to ask any questions or provide feedback to the current file, if you could please raise your hand in Zoom so that we may call on you. And we're going to start, Mr. Chair, with Chris Walmsley.
Perfect. Mr. Walmsley, after you, and you can state your name for the record and your address, please. And you have 5 minutes to speak.
Okay, just checking. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay. Thank you, members of the Planning Committee and staff for listening. I'm just going to offer some comments as I've already made a written submission. My name is Chris Walmsley. I'm a longtime resident of 239 Albert Street, the property immediately adjacent to the north of the subject property. I would like to speak against this proposal. And I'll just very briefly touch on a couple points that are from my written submission. I'm going to just propose that this lot is too small for what is being proposed, given what's already there. The points where they're requesting relief, there's 4 primary points. The limit on the number of residential units wouldn't currently allow more. The lot coverage would be exceeded by some small percentage, and the minimum lot size for the number of dwelling units they propose would be exceeded by 45%, as well as a yard setback alteration. 2 of these are significant requests, and this property already has what can undoubtedly called a monster addition on the back. The property already has a significant density in the existing 2 units on the front of the property. I don't understand quite what would warrant creating another zoning exception when it seems clear that this proposal does not fit on the lot. I've read through the proposal. I don't find anything particularly compelling to warrant adjusting the zoning to fit another building on this property that's already quite full. And speaking as a longtime resident, I've been here for almost 25 years. One of the requirements for this is this area is intended to remain a stable area, recognizing opportunities for intensification and infill. And I certainly understand the housing needs of the province and the city, and I understand that. But this particular property does not really present an opportunity. It's already intensified and has a large number of tenants. The application talks about how such an addition would increase the efficiency of the property. And I would beg that that argument means you could pack an arbitrarily large number of people and buildings onto it. I think you should flip the question around. Is this property inefficiently used as it currently stands? I do not think so. I think the amount of building, the size of the addition, the number of renters currently here would suggest it's not inefficient. One last point, I can speak with a certain authority about how these types of developments change the stability of a neighborhood or this neighborhood. The cumulative effect of these nearby similar developments has already changed the neighborhood. The neighborhood has moved from a relatively balanced neighborhood of permanent residents and student renters and has become very much out of balance and unfortunately ghettoized. It's creeping through Albert Street. This proposal would push things, however, incrementally further out of balance and does not represent something that, quote, would not change the stability of the neighborhood. And these incremental changes add up. And I've been here long enough to witness the direct effects. Imagine if every other property with lots too small to fit additional units under the current bylaws were granted zoning relief. It's just sort of, it seems to me, a slippery slope. I have other technical concerns that I've expressed in my letter about anything from parking and groundwater and the effective usable outdoor amenity space. And I have loss of privacy, reduced ability to enjoy my own property. There's all sorts of factors I have being right adjacent to that, but I'll leave that to my written submission. In summary, I encourage the planning department to put a critical eye to this and other similar proposals to see for what it is, a request to exceed the limits and restrictions currently within the bylaws in order to maximize revenue. That's all I'd like to say for now. Thank you very much to the committee and staff and other participants.
Thank you, Mr. Walmsley. Very well timed. 10 seconds to spare. So what we'll do for other members of the public that are here, we'll take 3 more periods of questions, and then we'll go to the applicant, and the applicant can address everything that we've heard for the first 4 individuals. So Madam Clerk, who's next?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Next to speak is Donna Lounsbury.
With your full name and address, and after you.
Yes, thanks so much. I hope you can hear me. My name is Donna Lounsbury. I live at 226 Frontenac Street, which is directly behind this proposed development. And I hope you've had a chance to read my submission. I won't go over everything, but let me make a few key points, as Chris just did. First of all, I'd like to commend the city and city councillors, including this planning committee, for the great progress that's been made over these past few years in what I view as a strong and progressive planning framework, especially through the Central Kingston Growth Strategy and amendments to the existing zoning bylaw 8499, which is unfortunately held up on appeal, as everybody knows. These new regulations, in my view, will bring greater stability and more prudent development in the Sydenham and Williamsville districts. But in the meantime, it may be another year or more before final approvals are received. So these residential communities close to Queens, I would say, are literally under siege by developers as they see a financial opportunity, sort of a short-term financial opportunity, to exploit the gaps and loopholes in our existing zoning bylaw and seek amendments as well, and simply build infill after infill. It may be hard to appreciate the scale and pace of development if you don't live right in this neighborhood. I would say take a walk through these beautiful old neighborhoods west of Queens, Frontenac, Albert Street, Collingwood, Victoria, Beverly Street even. Almost every week, there's a new large addition going up. And this is literally true. We don't have the luxury of waiting another year for change. It will be too late. While we wait for the new improved zoning bylaw, which I strongly support, it is the Wild West out there for developers, with overdevelopment and densely occupied buildings running westward from Frontenac Street right to College Street, above and below Union Street. And let's not kid ourselves, this is not affordable housing. Each unit, each bedroom goes for $900 per person per month. So I really believe it has to be a priority of city planning to stop this right now. And building hundreds of new units in these neighborhoods is absolutely undermining or cannibalizing even your own plan endorsed by council for further intensification along the primary corridors in Kingston. All those new, or many of those new apartment buildings, such as those on Princess Street, will feel the negative consequences of overdevelopment close to Queens. Since all else being equal, where will students live? They'll live very close to campus, even if it's a monster house in somebody's backyard. A couple very specific points on this particular proposal, and I'll try and be brief. We know it's a large new duplex they're proposing in the backyard of an existing large duplex, bringing the total number of students to 18 on that one property. This is not a case of complementary and compatible development, as noted by the developer, but rather excessive and needless intensification, wholly incompatible with the neighboring properties, two of which are family homes. So I would say, like, my block on Frontenac Street, where I've lived for 27 years, has been incredibly peaceful and stable, except for the past 2 years. It's a mix of, as many of you know, student and family homes and the old KCVI and Victoria School. But now the degradation of my entire living space is happening at lightning speed. Just next door, a large infill is being built right now. And now
30 seconds, please.
Okay, now we have this new proposal. So I'm looking at literally 12 students to the north, 18 students to the west. The official plan calls for stabilization. This is not that. One final point, I've often heard it said that families shouldn't be living in these areas. Well, we should fervently hope that that statement doesn't come true, because the presence.
And with that, I'll have to cut you off. I'm sorry, just out of interest of fairness for everyone. That was 5 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we recognize that you said you've also submitted this in written form. And if you'd like to send anything else, please do through the clerk or the director of planning. Madam Clerk, who's next?
Mr. Chair, next to speak is Joan Bowie.
Thank you very much, committee. My name is Joan Bowie. I live at 414 Albert Street. Okay, I won't repeat the various points raised by Ms. Lonsbury and Mr. Wanless. But I would like to add that as someone who has taken part in city committees about the Central Kingston Growth Strategy, I am really disappointed to see this kind of development being applied for when we know the city wants this kind of intensification up and down Brock and Johnson. Okay, so I will come back now to some smaller, which may be technical issues, but I have written to ask, what did the original duplexing of 231 Albert Street include? Were there conditions? Was there supposed to be an amenity area? Where was the parking? Was the back deck, which is going to come off, was that part of the amenity area? I sent a letter to planning asking what were the conditions of the original duplexing and when was it done? Because that makes a difference about parking and things like that. Second of all, I live on Albert Street. Albert Street and Victoria Park and everything is a flood zone. There is currently apparently a sump pump that pumps out, I think, to the northeast side. We have a sump pump. It is active winter and summer. Another building on there will be another sump pump. And where is the water going to go? Well, it's going to go into a swale, they say. Is the swale part of the amenity area? Apparently. The back of our yard, when the water is in it, is not any kind of amenity area. It's someplace we cannot walk. So this is ridiculous to think you're going to put another building in there. So these are technical things. I don't see it. The other thing, reading through the technical report, I noticed that they're looking at the density for plumbing and waste purposes. They have apparently put in per unit 2.38 people per dwelling unit. And this is apparently according to some census that was taken in 2016 or something. So they've just given an average. And we know, as previous speakers have said, how many people live there now. So some of these technical things I understand will be worked out, but you cannot stop the water. And I would really like to know what the original duplex agreement was. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Ms. Bowie. So what we'll do now, after we've heard from these first four members of the public, is turn it back to the applicant to respond to some of the questions and concerns raised. Ms. Kier, you can take the floor.
Through you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to ask my colleague, Yuko Leclerc, to answer to those questions, if that's okay.
That's totally fine. If Mr. Leclerc, you would take the floor then.
Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. And thanks for everyone who's taken the time to speak this evening. These comments are certainly echoing the written correspondence that we've read. I didn't hear too many questions, but I think there's a couple of points that I'd like to speak to from Mr. Walmsley and Ms. Lounsbury, as well as Ms. Bowie. And I will answer Ms. Bowie's question regarding the previous duplexing as well. Mr. Walmsley had a concern regarding the justification of efficiency of land use as being as allowing for a sort of an arbitrary upper limit on the number of units. I think to that concern, I would say that the official plan does provide a mechanism by which the appropriateness of an upper sort of a maximum density can be examined. The official plan identifies thresholds of low, medium, and high density residential use. And it sets out a number of tests that must be satisfied for medium and high density uses. Those tests increase in difficulty, I guess. They increase in sensitivity when going from low to medium and medium to high. This particular proposal achieves a medium density where the current land use on the site, the current 2 units, is a low density designation. It's a low density threshold. So there are a number of tests that have to be met through this application, and staff and ultimately planning committee and council will have to be satisfied that those tests are met before this application can be approved. With respect to parking, outdoor amenity, and privacy laws, those are actually all among the tests that have to be satisfied. The official plan sets out tests for compatibility of land use and ensuring that the functional needs of a property are met, ensuring that there's enough parking for a proposed development, that there's enough amenity area, be it indoor, outdoor, or a combination thereof, that privacy impacts on adjacent properties are satisfied and are minimized to the extent possible given the urban context. In this instance, certain aspects of the design have taken those goals into consideration. For example, the zoning bylaw sets out a minimum requirement of 1 parking space per dwelling unit. There are a total of 4 parking spaces proposed that results in 1 parking space per dwelling unit, which is in accordance with this current zoning bylaw, certainly recognizing that the zoning bylaw does not account for the number of bedrooms within a unit. The privacy loss on neighbors was a factor in a few different ways. It was factored into the design of the site and the sort of the design of the building. In particular, the setbacks to the north and south from the proposed duplex at the rear are significantly greater than the minimum requirements in the zoning bylaw for the A zone. So the A zone allows a dwelling to be as low as 2 feet or 0.6 meters from a property line. The setbacks that are proposed to the north and south side are on the order of a little over 2 meters to the north and south. The number of windows on those sides of the duplex are also minimized. There's no windows proposed on the north side, and I believe there's 1, maybe 2 on the south side, which has a greater setback. The setback from the rear to the east lot line is set at 6 meters, which is the minimum requirement for a rear yard in this zone. So the build form that's proposed is very much intending to capture and exceed some of the typical minimum requirements that you can see in this zone, and that a dwelling could be built on the zone if there were not already a dwelling on the property. That said, the technical review, the comprehensive, the technical review with staff and ultimately when this returns to council, we'll take those matters into consideration, and if any adjustments are needed to the site plan, they'll be made. The Central Kingston growth strategy speaks to the principle of gentle intensification of a built form that doesn't have adverse impacts to the streetscape and to adjacent properties. The density, that particular objective is central to the proposal in this case, in that the intention has been to size the duplex based on the typical standards for an accessory building in the A zone. So this is a very large lot. The property itself is over 800 square meters in area. What that means is that a minimum, an accessory building in the rear yard under the current zoning can be built more or less at the size of this proposed duplex. There's a lot of opportunity for construction of a big built form, which would not in and of itself trigger a zoning bylaw amendment. Now that space could not be used to house people as of right. Certainly that's why a zoning bylaw amendment is required in this case. But that particular consideration influenced the design of the site and the design of the proposed built form, really capturing what can be built under the current zoning. With respect to the previous duplexing on this property, I'm not able to speak to the timing beyond what I can see from aerial imagery. The property appears to have had the addition constructed at the rear sometime between 2004 and 2008. I would defer to staff on the permitting when that exactly happened. But through you, Mr. Chair, I can say that the lot area is sufficiently large that under the current zoning, under the A zone, that addition was constructed as of right. It was constructed fully in accordance with the current zoning. So there were no, certainly to my knowledge, that's the case. And I stand to be corrected by staff. I'm unaware of any minor variances or any planning approvals that were required. If that were the case, if it were built as of right, there would not have been any conditions for amenity or anything of that nature that would have been imposed at that time. The applicant would have simply had to demonstrate that the addition and the zoning requirements in place were satisfied. So 2 parking spaces, for example, and whatever other standards were in place when that addition was constructed. With respect to the question of the number of units, people per unit from a plumbing perspective, that's certainly the type of feedback that will be reviewed a little bit more closely with staff through the technical review process. And should that number be revisited, that's something that can be done and can be reported back to this committee and the public. Mr. Chair, I believe that answers the key points and the key questions that were made, but if I missed anything, I'm happy to speak to that.
All right, thanks, Mr. Leclerc. We'll go back to members of the public, and if members of the committee want to circle back on any of those initial responses, they're more than welcome to do so in a few moments. Madam Clerk, do we have anyone else who'd like to speak from the public?
Mr. Chair, at this time, we only have repeat hands at the moment, so I can do a final call and see if there's anyone else who has not already spoken this evening who would like to ask a question or provide comment on the current file. You can please raise your hand in Zoom, and I see that Donald Mitchell has raised his hand.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. You can speak for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and you can hear me okay?
Can you try one more time? I actually found that a bit hard to hear.
Sure, just a sec. I'm going to unplug easier. Can you hear me better that way?
Much better, yes.
Okay, sorry, I had to turn my volume up. My apologies. So Donald Mitchell, I live at 43 Gibson Avenue, and I want to thank the committee for all of your work and consideration of these remarks. I'm going to stay relatively general because the adjacent homeowners have been very specific, but the first thing I want to do is from myself, but obviously there are a lot more than just me who have followed this, but I want to give my sympathy to the adjacent homeowners. And at high level, I would like to speak to a couple of things. So it concerns me, thank you to the local councillor that he brought this to our attention in early December. It concerns me, and I'd like some explanation of the appeal process, because my lay understanding is you got till February 13th for council to make a decision one way or the other, and then the applicant can appeal. So I think that these members of the public and homeowners, especially those adjacent homeowners, should understand things like, are we at a disadvantage if an appeal is made by the applicant? Does the city lose leverage and decision-making control? And how do residents participate if that type of an appeal goes forward? I don't quite understand how 3 months blows by and this hasn't come forward even for a public meeting. For most of the lay public, myself included, we rely on that comprehensive report and the staff expertise that's contained in it. And so that's sort of like the public's value returned, right? You pay for this staff and we get the benefit of getting them to help us interpret what's happening to our homes. And again, I feel very strongly and sorry for the people that are adjacent to this, because how do they understand what could be a very profound effect on their home in a very, very fluid time in planning in general, and also in Kingston specific? So the other way that we know is, you know, the residents, the renters and homeowners, you know, it doesn't really matter who it is. We understand this because of all these policies, right? And the official plan and the zoning bylaw and secondary plans and studies. So we're all participating in these processes, and it's all moving forward. But, you know, it's been over 5 years for some of this stuff, you know, and we're chasing old zoning bylaw and new zoning bylaw, and city staff tell, you know, our counselor that we shouldn't do an interim control bylaw, et cetera. And so this is very confusing time, I think, for the general public. So again, I feel very sorry that, you know, more than a half decade later, there really is not a lot of clarity about what you can do and can't do. And these masters that know how to get into these rules and bend them to make their applications fit is really difficult for the public to understand. The provincial as of right permissions that have come recently have led to, and there are people like Patrick Condon from UBC who say this, it's led to this increase of land price speculation. You know, and I think this application, there's 2 points I would bring out. One is the purchase land cost is unlikely what's driving this development. And number two, this application's exceeding permissions past, current and future zoning, most likely. It's just unnecessarily big. And I would love to hear someone like the gentleman who coined missing middle, Dan Paralek. I'd love to know what Dan Paralek would say about this development, because I think it's an abuse in scale of what's intended by missing middle or at scale infill. So the one request I have is I think site plan should be bumped for sure. So the local councillor for sure should bump site plan. The accessible aisle location, I think, is suspect. The lot function of any open space is suspect. There should be mitigation plantings looked at. Fence height should be altered for the neighbor to the east, I guess it would be. Snow and water runoff needs to be looked at. The parking configuration, the sidewalk, snow clearing. So I think site plan needs to be bumped. I think there's a lot of good about this application. Thankfully, there is actually a sidewalk, which is really, really cool. And there were other things that I really kind of like too. It's just mostly the scale. I think I'm just going to leave it at that. But I think that planning committee, if this comes forward in this shape, I think they should be saying no. And I think we can get an awful lot of our community to understand why we would feel that it should be a no as well. Anyway, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. Madam Clerk.
Mr. Chair, I'm not seeing any new hands. I'm just going to do one final call for anyone who hasn't had a chance to speak tonight to the current file. If you'd like to speak now, please raise your hand in Zoom so that we may call on you. And I'm not seeing any more hands, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Fawcett. So, Mr. Clerk, I'll give you some time to respond, and then perhaps Mr. Park, you could speak to a few of the questions around process that were brought up in that last delegation.
Thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair. I would like to thank Mr. Mitchell for expressing his thoughts on this file. And I think that the vast majority of the components of Mr. Mitchell's commentary regarding the proposal or echoing what has previously been said. There were some, I think, some concerns raised about some of the functional aspects of the site, snow clearing and so forth. That certainly we'll take back and review more closely and would be addressed through site plan control, but certainly that would be to staff satisfaction. I believe that the key question that I heard was primarily relating to process, as you noted. If there's anything that I missed, though, I'm certainly pleased to speak to that.
All right, thank you, Mr. Park.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Mr. Mitchell, for your questions and expressing your concerns about planning staff's approach to reviewing development applications. We continue to do our best doing that, and we do follow the policies of the official plan and the Planning Act. In terms of process, this application was submitted by the applicant. Once staff determined all the technical reports that were required for the application to move forward were received, the application is then deemed complete. Once an application is deemed complete, the Planning Act kicks in, and it requires, depending on the nature of the application, whether it's official plan amendment or a zoning application. In this case, it's a zoning application. So the Planning Act dictates that within 90 days, the municipal council must make a decision on the application. That is a timeline that, if you talk to any municipal planning department, will tell you is totally inachievable. But the real purpose behind that clause is it gives the applicant the ability, if a municipality drags its feet or does not process its application in an appropriate amount of time, they can appeal on that basis. That is not the situation here. The application was received. It is going through the process. We're holding the public meeting tonight. It's just the 90-day period happened to be February 13th. I can also state unequivocally that within the city of Kingston, it's quite rare, if ever, that an applicant opts to use that ability to appeal to the Ontario Land Tribunals, because it really serves them no purpose. Because at that point, there's no comprehensive report from city staff that would either support or refuse the application. So this option is really reserved for the applicant that feels that the municipality they are dealing with is not processing the application in proper due course. I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Park. So over to committee, and just a reminder to committee that we'll try to stick to questions as much as we can because there's no actual decision before us to debate tonight. And also that a reminder, Councillor Stroud is here as the district councillor. So we'll give him an opportunity as well after committee has the first kick at the can. Councillor Neal, please.
Just very quickly, I don't believe there was an answer given to Joan Bowie's comments about her concern about flooding and sump pumped up and down Albert Street. So I was hoping to get a response regarding that.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the councillor mentioning that. The study was accompanied, the application was accompanied by a stormwater management report and a grading and servicing plan, which identified how stormwater management will be addressed on the property. Without getting into too much detail, the engineer identified that existing swales on the property would be used and would be refined as needed to ensure that drainage continue to follow effectively the current pattern that it's following. What the stormwater management report, I don't believe speaks to is changes in building code practices and building code requirements around drainage in new construction. that would generally be to the benefit of this new dwelling, but that may not be in existence or to the benefit of existing dwellings through the area. Now, I say that in a very general sense. I'm not a building code expert. I'm not particularly well versed in the building code. I'm just aware that there are generally improvements to drainage around dwellings. So that's, I'm not sure if that answers the question, but that's the only reply that I can truly give you.
I look forward to the city when they review the application to pay close attention to that. There's seldom a week goes by where I don't get an email about flooding on the street that's caused by inadequate sump pumps and especially during the rainfall of spring and that. So it's definitely something we need to pay attention to. The other thing, am I correct in my math? I'm a retired drama teacher, so my math isn't always great, but I believe that there's 18 bedrooms that will be on this site with only 4 assigned parking spaces. Is that accurate? And only 4 assigned bicycle parking spaces. Is that accurate?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is what the application is proposing.
Yeah. I know that we don't talk about tenancy, but the reality for this whole neighborhood is that will be 18 adults in all likelihood. And having 4 parking spaces where on-street parking is also already a nightmare on Frontenac and Albert, and to a certain extent on Alfred, that will only create more problems on the street. And so that's definitely a concern that I have with this application. So I look forward to you addressing some of those issues before the comprehensive report comes forward. A quick process question, if I might, for Mr. Park. I know in lieu of us and the district councillor raising the whole idea of having an interim control bylaw, was that we were going to address these oversized developments. And we've done that, although it's now in the LPAC. But council and planning passed a motion that's now before the LPAC. Could you explain to the public that are still here where we're at with this process and whether this proposal would have a snowball's chance if indeed we had that provision that we've already passed?
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. Off the top of the head, my recollection is a pre-hearing conference has been scheduled for the Ontario Land Tribunal, and that's the first step in an Ontario Land Tribunal process. It just kind of flushes out the issues, what's to be discussed between the two parties, and then the board member kind of scopes the issues from there. So I believe that's forthcoming in March, if I believe correctly. After that, then we would wait for the next step, which would be the scheduling of the actual hearing itself. Your second question is if that report that went forward by planning that was recommending a total of aggregate of 8 bedrooms over 2 residential units had not been appealed and was in place, this application would not be given consideration.
Thank you very much. And just a quick comment. I will support a motion, process motion, if anybody wants to make it so that the district councillor can be heard first in future. I would support that motion. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. You know what? I think that that's at my discretion as chair to suggest that to committee and look for any objection. Seeing none, Councillor Stroud, if you'd like to take the floor now, that's more than okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you.
Perhaps it's me, but Councillor Stroud has frozen. Alrighty, so we'll give him a moment to reconnect. Are there any other committee members who like?
I've heard a lot about this. I wanted to sort of start by reminding my colleagues, my esteemed colleagues, of your role in all of this. So you obviously you're sitting here as members of the planning committee, but how did you get to be city councillors? You went around the neighborhoods talking to people, you know, and promised to represent them at.
Councillor Stroud, I'm sorry to interrupt you. If you can hear me, we can't hear you. You've been cutting out consistently. So what I'll do is come back to you, start your time afresh. I'll look to another councillor to take the floor right now. You can disconnect and reconnect because you just keep cutting out.
Okay, hang on. I think my son must be playing a video game. Can you hear me?
We can hear you now, yes.
Did you get all he just stop? Sorry, he's got a new computer and it's a gaming laptop. He's very excited and he must be playing a game with a wide bandwidth.
That is amazing. Okay, so try again. You can start from the top.
Okay, so you didn't really hear anything, I guess?
No.
Awesome. All right, well, that was a good dry run. Okay, so first of all, just remind my colleagues our role in this. We make the final decision at council. And what does that mean? Well, you know, we wouldn't have the decision, it wouldn't be in council's hands if the decision was always a done deal, right? There's always a yes or a no. You vote yes or no to everything. So, so on something like this, what are you doing? You're representing your constituents. So do the constituents want you to follow the official plan? Do they want you to follow the zoning bylaw? I mean, especially in my district, they've got it's a very sore subject, the zoning bylaw. We've heard comments about, you know, the delay in the new zoning bylaw, but this particular thing, the truth is, it fits as of right the original zoning bylaw and was probably maximized at that time, whenever that was in 2006 or whatever. It was probably maximized whatever the as of right applied because it's a very large addition that's there right now. So they already got their maximum allowable density under the zoning bylaw. And this is a 1 or 2 family zone. It's the lowest density zone we have. And what we've heard from the planner, this is going to be medium density by their calculations. You know, on the high side, I would take a medium density. And then, you know, you've got the two restrictions on size, on just pure density. One is the square footage one, right? So that is 810 square meters is enough for 2 dwellings, right? Because each dwelling is 370 square meters. And this is 4. So it's double. It's double what is the allowable by square meters. It is also double what is allowed by the zone because the zone is 1 or 2 family dwellings, right? So it's basically just doubling it because it is a large-ish lot. It's not our first rodeo. We know how this works. The developer comes with a very aggressive ask at first, and then things get trimmed down maybe later because they've set the bar so high and they end up getting a lot. 18 bedrooms, just a number. And I know it's not British to talk about money, but if you take 18 bedrooms and multiply it by $900 a month, that's $194,400 a year in rent. $194,400 a year is what this is going to. There's no way that the original price they pay for this property requires that kind of income to support. This is just a grab. And I think I do agree with Mr. Mitchell when he said there are some good features to, I think that the planners are very good on this file. There are some good features, but the pure size, they'll try to talk about it's the same size as an accessory dwelling, but it's not an accessory dwelling. It's a whole nother duplex. It's outrageously excessive. And I just think, what you do as a council when if you say yes to this kind of thing, you've just doubled the density of my entire district, because everybody else is going to come and ask for the same thing. You've just doubled the density in the 1 and 2 family zone in my entire district. So yes, I will be thinking about interim control bylaw if this passes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Stroud. Councillor Hill.
Yeah, I really agree with a lot of what Councillor Stroud has said. And I guess my question, and I'm going to make a quick comment after that to the applicants is, are you relying on our focus on intensification to justify this project? Because this seems just completely out of proportion to what exists in that neighborhood right now.
Mr. Leclerc.
Through you, Mr. Chair. This particular proposal is supported from our end with respect to its fulfillment of provincial policy and official plan goals, largely around intensification and compatibility. So I think in short, the answer is yes, that the objective here is really to help intensify this site and increase the density in an area that, in our opinion, is appropriate for an intensification. The built form that is being proposed by the applicant has been through a number of iterations in terms of trying to scale it, I guess, scale it down to sort of achieve a built form and an overall site configuration that achieves those official plan goals around compatibility and functional needs, while intensifying a site in a way that doesn't adversely affect the streetscape or the surrounding neighborhood. So it is our opinion that that's yes.
So when we look at compatibility, let's use that as an example here. Do you look at other homes in the district and say, okay, what other duplex in the district has a duplex in the backyard? Can you tell me if there are any?
Through you, Mr. Chair, our review of whether a proposal of this nature is compatible is based on the characteristics of the site itself. So we're looking at the dimensions of the property, what's there now, what's there on the adjacent properties, and how should the site be designed so that it doesn't result in adverse effects on those adjacent properties in accordance with official plan policy regarding compatibility and functional needs and mitigation measures when there are concerns around compatibility. So it's not an exercise in saying, sort of canvassing a neighborhood and saying this property, this property, this property have what may be a duplex in the backyard and saying this is an appropriate site for that. It's not like that. It is really very much an exercise in looking at this particular site. To the specific question, excuse me, through Mr. Chair, to the specific question, I'm not aware of any properties in this area that have a duplex in their rear yard.
And certainly if there was other properties that had a duplex in their backyard, it would make your argument easier, would it not?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's, I believe it's not a rationale that we would be making or hanging our hats on. Just because one property does something does not mean that the adjacent property can do the same. It doesn't make it appropriate for another property. The planning is truly looking at the individual characteristics of a proposal and of a given site.
Yeah, okay, well, that's, I think we have lots of examples in the city of Kingston that isn't quite, that really does, one does sort of follow the other. And I got to go back to what Councillor Stroud said. You're effectively going to double, potentially set the precedent to double the intensification. Like, we're not trying to redevelop turn of the century East London. I mean, I have to tell you that if this comes back in the form that it looks at like right now, I would be very, very hard pressed to support this. So I certainly hope when you go back and sit down with staff that you look at substantial changes to what you're proposing here, because this is way outside the pale in my estimation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hill. Anyone else from committee? Yes, Councillor Chappelle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a number of questions, and I'm not sure if staff will end up. So my first question, I think, is with staff, and that is the current zoning of this property. What is the perceived next zoning when the comprehensive zoning bylaw comes in? Does this zoning change, or is it stay the same when the new comprehensive zoning bylaw comes in a few months?
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair, I'm just pulling up the current proposed zoning, which is the urban residential 5 zone for this area, which will also remain as a 1 and 2 family dwelling zone as far as I am aware.
And the purpose, Mr. Barwell, I still have you there, and the purpose of this comprehensive zoning bylaw from the presentation that was presented to council was really about eliminating all the site-specific zoning. Is that not the purpose of this comprehensive zoning bylaw for the city of Kingston?
Thank you, and through you, Chair. The purpose of the comprehensive zoning bylaw for the city of Kingston primarily is to amalgamate the patchwork of zoning bylaws, different zoning bylaws that we have across the city. Currently, there are 5 main ones, but there are also some sub other zoning bylaws that actually date back to the 40s and 50s, which are still active on some sites. So what we're trying to do is create an amalgamated zoning bylaw for the entire city with an updated set of regulations for a modern day city. So there are a lot of changes that are happening within the zoning bylaw, but it is still implementing the intent of the current official plan. And in addition to that, we are looking to just simplify and modernize the language in the zoning bylaw.
And so from that, what I take from that, Mr. Barr, is that if it's zoned as a 1 family 2 zone residential property, the intent is going forward, it'd also be zoned as a 1-2 family zone property in A5 designation. Is that the intent?
Through you, Chair, yes, that's correct. So this parent zone will still have those general permissions for number of units.
Okay. So what we're being faced with here is looking at another example of a site-specific zoning application, which creates these perversions, or as Mr. Mitchell so eloquently put, an abuse in scale. So with respect to that, I just want to confirm 2 things for me. The residential units beside this property to the north, south, or east, all around it are currently single detached dwellings. Is that correct?
Who would like to field that? Mr. Leclerc?
For you, Mr. Chair. It's not always possible to tell at a glance in this neighborhood. But my read of the immediately adjacent properties is that they are single detached dwellings.
So then my 2 questions for you as the planner behind this is, how does this support the stability of the neighborhood without providing a negative impact? So please explain that to me, because that's very unclear.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the planning report that we wrote in support of this application sets that out and explains our perspective and our opinion regarding why this proposal is not resulting in negative impacts to this neighborhood, and why it achieves the goal that we're saying that it does. I've spoken, I think, a little bit earlier to some of the aspects of the design of the site that, in our opinion, are fulfilling that and achieving that. But short of sort of reiterating my report in its entirety, which I would not obviously be prepared to do it at this point in time.
So what I'm getting is that your report versus the report of the residents and the municipal councillor from this district, Councillor Stroud, has put forward, they're a dichotomy. They're opposing each other. They're opposing views. Would that be a fair assessment then? And so we don't have to repeat everything?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think that I am certainly I think it's fair to say that there is a difference of opinion with respect to the overall proposal. Certainly the feedback that we're hearing tonight will inform how we proceed with this application and the technical circulation. So as Councillor Hill indicated earlier, that changes would need to be made to the plan almost certainly in order for that particular councillor to support it. That may be the case with other councillors as well. So there may be changes to the plan certainly moving forward, but yes, I think to your question, to the councillor's question, there is a difference of opinion.
Okay. And so my final question really relates to the fact that Kingston has declared a climate emergency on March 9, 2019. I would like to understand how this particular proposal supports the climate emergency that the city of Kingston has taken great strides to try to assert. Because look, obviously there's been trees removed, large trees, there's flooding, there's issues. How does this support our climate concerns in the city of Kingston?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the same extent that intensification in general is supportive of reducing overall municipal carbon footprints, this proposal fulfills that and supports those goals as iterated by council. The proposal is proposing 4 parking spaces, which is in accordance with the zoning bylaw, not proposing to exceed the number of parking spaces. Bike parking spaces is proposed in order to support active transportation. This is a proposal in an area that is highly walkable. It's in proximity to a number of different transit routes, employment centers, commercial uses. So it's in an area that is itself highly supportive of a degree of intensification. And the extent of the intensification proposed is, in our opinion, consistent with the official plan goals for this area, and the nature of the proposal and the aspect of it is consistent with that as well. So really what we're looking at is a proposal that, in our opinion, fulfills a number of goals at the official plan level, including the climate emergency goals for this site. The level of density proposed here is only slightly denser. Earlier in this meeting, we spoke a little bit about, or earlier in a previous public meeting, I should say, we spoke about developments in the, I guess, the suburban areas of the city. The density that's proposed for this site is on par with the level of density that you see in some of those areas. It's a little bit more dense than what you would typically see for a single detached dwelling in those new subdivisions, but it's about as dense as you would see for a semi-detached dwelling or a townhouse dwelling. So the level of density that's proposed here, given the size of the lots, is a little bit more dense than what you would see out there, but not that much more, and in an area that is significantly more supportive of higher density.
So I'm just going to reflect back what you stated. What you're, and please correct me if I'm off base. What you're saying is that the increase in density is because of the location and proximity to walkable active transportation opportunities. That increase in density outweighs the environmental impact of removing trees and green space from the existing existing property.
Through you, Mr. Chair, not quite. The proposal, and this is, I didn't answer that particular aspect of the councillor's question regarding tree removal. There is a proposal as part of this application to preserve trees to the extent that is possible on the site. There's a tree preservation guideline that's been included. It is being examined through technical review with staff to see how much tree preservation can be accommodated on the site. The trees on the current property, there are a number of mature trees that sort of run around the perimeter in many ways. And the intention is to maximize those trees preservation. So keeping them there as much as possible. Certainly if there's any tree removal, that would be accompanied by replacement, but I appreciate that that's a long-term renewal of carbon drawing versus a mature tree. stormwater management report speaks to the amount of impermeable surface on the site is not fundamentally changing that much. So the amount of runoff that's being generated on the site is not going to be that different with the proposal given as compared to the current situation because of the amount of the rear yard that's paved or gravel. So the proposal is in a lot of ways looking to not have an adverse impact on those particular features in terms of increasing stormwater runoff or removing trees while supporting intensification on the site.
Yeah, I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Chappelle. I'm looking to committee members who haven't asked a question. If I don't see any, I'm happy to open up to a second round for Councillor Stroud or others who have already gone once before. All right, seeing none, I'm going to ask a question or two. Councillor Hill, could you take the chair?
I take the chair and I recognize you.
Thank you. And through you then, I'm also interested in density here, and I want to ask it in respect to the secondary suite policy that council has recently approved and that is now active in the city of Kingston. I'm wondering if your applicant took that into consideration at all in making this proposal.
Mr. Leclerc?
Mr. Chair, yes, as the property currently has 2 units, it would not be eligible for a second residential unit. The proposed new zoning bylaw, sort of the new zoning bylaw will be implementing provisions around additional residential units, third residential units. So the applicant is aware of that. In this instance, the proposal of 4 units was sought specifically because the applicant was targeting a particular built form in the rear yard that could accommodate 1 unit with 6 bedrooms, or in this case, 2 units with 3 bedrooms each as is proposed. So the applicant particularly sought this configuration, even though it's a higher unit count, because the individual units would themselves be smaller and a little bit more broadly appealable from a market perspective. They would just appeal to a wider range of potential residents.
All right, so supplemental to that, through you, Councillor Hill. And actually, you've kind of anticipated my supplemental, which is they decided not with the forthcoming tertiary rules in order to maximize profit on this built form. Is that what you just said? Is that correct? You said it's more marketable in that form, disregarding the fact that we're going to have a rule that would allow for 3. They would prefer 4 because they could sell it easier. Is that right?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I wouldn't frame it that way. I don't know that my client would either. The greater flexibility, the greater, I guess, range of appeal of a 3-unit is also a lot easier to manage. A 3-bedroom unit versus a 6-bedroom unit just has a lot of advantages from a functional perspective. Going to 4 units triggers additional challenges, such as this particular zoning bylaw amendment, parking requirements, site plan control approval. So it's certainly not an easier process. It's certainly not the path of least resistance, which would be, I think, most likely. I'm not an economist. I can't speak to whether it would be more or less profitable one way or another, and I wouldn't make any effort to go that route. But the proposal that was brought forward was brought forward for the reason of making the units smaller.
All right, sure. I look forward to the comprehensive, and I think there's a very fulsome debate to be had. Thank you.
I'll return the chair, Councillor Connolly.
Much appreciated. Okay, final call for committee members, or Councillor Stroud, you're welcome also to participate again. Please do, yes. I recognize you, Councillor Stroud.
Can you hear me? Yeah, oh, it's okay. Well, thanks for paying such close attention to this important file in my district, guys. And I know there's always this, I'm just going to finish with this one suggestion of mine. So how do you get good development in your city? It's paradoxical, but the way you get good development in your city is by knowing your stuff and not being afraid to say no when it's time to say no. Right? That's how you get. You only have a yes or a no, right? I mean, there's only one way to exercise it. So yes, there's a land tribunal, by the way, that isn't the case in many other places in the world. Many places in the world, the municipal council is the final body, There may be an appeal process, but it is the final body of decision. It doesn't go to the LPAT like in the land tribunal like it does in Ontario. That's a little bit unique to Ontario. Nevertheless, you may be tempted to think, oh, well, I'm going to try to read my crystal ball and predict what's going to happen at the land use tribunal if it ends up there, which is where the next step would be with a persistent developer that really wants to get something to happen and didn't like taking no for an answer. However, you still only have a yes or a no. So if you really want to represent your constituents who've elected you to, make good decisions, you have to be willing to use your no. And I think you all know this. I'm preaching to the choir. It's just it's two different things. You can look, keep one eye on the land use tribunal, but that may not always be there, right? It may not always be there in its current form. And what is always there is how you feel about yourself and whether you made good decisions for the people that elected you. So I just urge you to really keep that in mind when this comes back. How do you best represent the people of Kingston to get good development in the city of Kingston, smart growth with desirable buildings? There are elements to this proposal that are attractive. I actually do think that having the smaller number of bedrooms per unit, as Mr. Leclerc was saying, is actually a sign of good development. When I see that, it's always a good sign. However, we're already at the maximum on this site. So it's like the right method in the wrong place, I guess is the way I would put on that. There are some encouraging things about this, the flavor of this, but that is most all done to entice us into saying yes to the size. And I just don't think there's any way to get around the egregious ask here. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stroud. And it's always great to have the district councillor join us. So I appreciate your contributions tonight, and I'm sure your residents who are here do as well. Alrighty, so with that, we'll move to our next public meeting because I don't see other hands from committee, but I'm going to call a 10-minute recess because we're 2 hours in and only 2 files down. So we'll see everyone at 10 after 8. Thank you. Okay, folks, if you could make your way back, that'd be excellent. It is now 10 after 8, and I see Councillor Hill, Chappelle, Neal. So that gives us quorum. Councillor Osanik. And we will move right into our third public meeting, which is our third file, obviously. And then after this, we will have regular business, which includes one file to be dealt with at that time as well. And thanks to committee, I really appreciate everyone staying to questions as we move through these. It makes for a smooth meeting and some good investigation of the file. So thanks very much. We are now on 1555 Sydenham Road. And like always, we'll hand it to city staff first and then to the applicant's planner.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. Notice for this application was given in accordance with the Planning Act as detailed in the public meeting report. We have not received any public correspondence at this time. This is a statutory public meeting held under the Planning Act, the purpose of which is for the applicant to present their proposal to the public and planning committee and answer questions from committee and members of the public. As part of this public meeting, planning staff has prepared a public meeting report summarizing the proposal. It should be noted that no recommendations or decisions are being made this evening regarding this report. Planning staff are in attendance this evening to record the questions being asked of the applicant or to address technical questions regarding the planning process. Feedback received will be addressed by planning staff within a future comprehensive report once technical review of the application is complete and staff are ready to make a recommendation.
Thank you very much. Who do we have up for the applicant? Mr. Leclerc, 3 of 3. Very good.
Good evening and thank you, Mr. Chair. Just for the record, my name is Hugo Leclerc. I'm a planner with Foten Planning and Design, presenting applications for official plan and zoning bylaw amendment for 1555 Sydenham Road. There is also a concurrent site plan control application on this file, and the applicant in this project is the Lakeshore School. Next slide, please. Our subject property is located north of the city in the Sunnyside hamlet. It's a little over 1 hectare in area with a little more than 100 meters of frontage on the west side of Sydenham Road. This property is in proximity to a range of uses, residential and otherwise. To the south and east are predominantly residential uses. Immediately to the north is undeveloped agriculturally zoned land. To the further north is a anchor concrete, and then throughout the hamlet are a mix of uses, religious institutions, and a small number of commercial. Next slide, please. The subject property itself, as shown on this aerial image, is already developed with a 1-story brick building. The gymnasium at the rear reads as a bit taller than 1 story, of course, because it just has a higher ceiling. This was originally developed as a school. It is currently serving as a commercial, generally an office use, and has served that function since around 2005, 2006, when it was rezoned to the current use. This is a property that we refer to as being on partial services, meaning that it is receiving city water, but does not have city sewer. So it is on a private septic system. Next slide, please. This site is in the hamlet designation in the official plan. This is a designation that allows a wide range of uses, just recognizing that these are areas that are intended for sort of a greater range of uses than are otherwise permitted outside of the urban boundary. Interestingly, the official plan does not permit private elementary schools in the hamlet designation. Private public elementary schools are permitted, but not private schools. Next slide, please. Under the current zoning, the subject site is within a special local commercial zone, the C1-9 zone, in zoning bylaw 7626, which applies to the former Kingston Township. This zone allows a very limited number of commercial uses. It allows office space, it allows a personal service shop, as well as a business related to software development and computer hardware testing and assembly. The site-specific zoning also applies a number of other site-specific provisions regarding parking and loading standards. Next slide, please. The intent and purpose of this application is to allow the site to be redeveloped and repurposed, I should say, for a private school. Lakeshore School is growing and is approaching the end of its lease, and they are looking to relocate to this site with the intention of opening at the beginning of September to minimize disruption to students. So the purpose of this application is to facilitate that conversion. There are no changes proposed to the exterior of the building, to the building footprint whatsoever. Certainly renovations will be required to the interior to bring it up to current standards around code for a school. To this site itself, there are also very minimal changes proposed. Particularly the changes that are proposed are more to the existing surfaces. So the site has a large parking lot that allows a whole bunch of parking spaces. The school does not have a need for the entire surface area to be used for parking. So one of the aspects of the application is to apply a site-specific standard for a school based on the number of classrooms. The result is that the requirement would only be about 12 spaces, but the school will be proposing 22 to have a little bit more flexibility. The balance of the surface area that's used for parking now would be repurposed as outdoor play space, as hard surface play space. The site otherwise has approximately 2/3 of its area is grass, and that would remain. Next slide, please. To facilitate that change, an official plan amendment is required because of the reason that I noted earlier regarding a hamlet. So a site-specific policy is proposed to allow a privately funded elementary school to be developed on this property. Now, I'll take this opportunity to acknowledge that city staff have brought forward an application to amend the official plan, which would apply this same request on a more sort of a broader scale. I can't speak to the overall status of that application. However, I note that this is a proposal that generally aligns with a proposal that staff are also bringing forward from an official plan perspective. Next slide, please. The site-specific zoning that's proposed. So the site is already within a site-specific zone that applies only to this property. So rather than applying a new site-specific zone, the applicant is proposing to amend the existing site-specific zone to allow an elementary school to be permitted on the site. That the term is not defined in the zoning bylaw, so it would be defined in this instance to broadly apply to both private or publicly funded schools. In addition to allowing an elementary school, the new zoning would also allow a daycare as an accessory use, as is commonly done with schools of all types. In addition to allowing the proposed use, the site-specific zone would allow a number of existing sort of deficiencies from a zoning perspective in terms of setbacks, planting strips. The building itself exceeds the maximum permitted gross floor area for a single use in this zone, in the C1 zone. So we would be proposing to recognize that existing condition. And as noted earlier, the proposal would also be applying a site-specific parking ratio for a school based on the number of classrooms. That proposed standard is the City of Kingston's zoning bylaws right now don't consistently apply standards for this type of use for a public or private school. So the new zoning bylaw is proposing a ratio of 1.5 spaces per classroom, which is what's being proposed in this instance as well. Next slide, please. And with that, I'll note that this is a proposal, a use that is itself broadly consistent with the provincial policy statement in the official plan. It's compatible in this area. It's compatible with the adjacent and surrounding land uses. It is our opinion that it represents good land use planning. Next slide, please. And with that, I thank you for your time and I welcome any questions or comments through you, Mr. Chair.
Perfect. Thank you so much. We'll follow the same format for anyone joining us right now. That means members of the public will have an opportunity 5 minutes each with their full name and address to ask questions and express opinions about the file. And then after 4 members of the public have spoken, the planner will respond and then we'll move to committee. So Madam Clerk, is anyone here to participate?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you, we do still have one member of the public with us this evening who may wish to speak, so we'll give them an opportunity at this time. Should you wish to ask a question or provide any comment on the current file, if you could please raise your hand in Zoom so that we may call on you. I'll ask one more time in case. If you'd like to speak to the current application, please raise your hand in Zoom so that we may call on you. And I'm not seeing any movement, Mr. Chair.
Fair enough. Thank you very much. So members of the committee, any questions for Mr. Leclerc? Going once, twice, 3 times, seeing none. We will call this public meeting closed and we'll look forward to the comprehensive report on that file. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Excellent. And we will move into our regular agenda. So I would look for, first I'll call the meeting to order. It is now 8:01. And I'll look for an approval of the agenda. Mover and a seconder, please. Councillor Neal, Councillor Rosanek, all those in favor? Oh, Madam Clerk.
Sorry, Mr. The addendum, please.
This is added. You can find that online and we're approving that at the same time. So Councillor Neal, Councillor Rosanek, agenda as amended, all in favor? Perfect. Confirmation of minutes. There are 2 sets of minutes here, one from January 13th, another from January 20th. The mover and seconder, please. Councillor Hill, Councillor Chappelle, all those in favor? Very good. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest? Seeing Councillor Neal.
Yes, thank you very much. As in the past, I'll declare a potential pecuniary interest as my daughter owns a property 1 short walk away from this property. So thank you very much. I guess I get to say good night, right?
I think you do. Have a good night. Thank you very much to you as well.
Thanks.
Anyone else? All right, we have no delegations, no briefings. We do have one file under business, and this is about a number of addresses at the intersection of Raglan and Rideau Street. And we'll follow the same procedure as we just did, with one exception that committee will go first at this juncture. And staff can take it from here.
Okay, thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair, this presentation is for a zoning bylaw amendment for 178 Rideau Street, 3 Raglan Road, and 5 Raglan Road. Next slide. The purpose of the zoning bylaw amendment is to redevelop the existing 3-unit, 5-bedroom dwelling at 178 Rideau Street and 3 Raglan Road, with a 3.5-story, 6-unit dwelling with 13 bedrooms, and to retain the existing single-unit dwelling with 2 bedrooms at 5 Raglan Road. The existing site includes 4 units and 7 bedrooms, and the total proposed development will contain 7 units and 15 bedrooms. The site would be rezoned to a site-specific multifamily residential zone. The 2 properties are expected to function as a single entity, which was reflected in the review of the file as well as the proposed zoning provisions. Next slide. The site is located on the corner of Raglan Road and Rideau Street in the Inner Harbor neighborhood. The site is located on the periphery of a 1- and 2-family zone, which extends to the west and contains various institutional, row house, and apartment complex residential uses. This block of Raglan Road is characterized by compact 1- to 2-story homes. North and south along Rideau Street is slightly larger 2.5-story dwellings. Rideau Crest Home, a 5-story institutional complex, is located across Rideau Street to the east. Next slide. The subject property is designated residential in the official plan. The goal for the residential designation is to respond to the housing needs of the city's citizens by retaining and augmenting a broad range of housing at all levels of affordability within a safe, convenient, and stable setting. The proposal is considered an infill, intensification, and conversion project as listed under the residential uses section. And the proposal has been assessed based on the high density residential requirements in the official plan. The property is in a 1 and 2 family dwelling A zone in Bylaw 8499. The A zone does not allow for multifamily dwellings, so the applicant proposes to rezone the property to a site-specific B zone, which permits multifamily and single-family dwellings. Although the proposal is for a high-density residential development, the B zone was chosen to accommodate the existing single-unit dwelling at 5 Raglan Road, and because the 6-unit dwelling is more consistent with the built form of a medium density development. Detailed review of the official plan, policies, and zoning provisions can be found in the submitted report package. Next slide. The site is currently developed with a 2.5-story 1-unit dwelling and a 2-story 3-unit dwelling with a gravel parking area. The site has a combined lot area of 540 square meters. A large city-owned tree is next to the site, which the applicant intends to preserve, and a tree preservation plan has been submitted. Next slide. The new 6-unit building will be at the corner of Rideau and Raglan. Units located on the 2nd and 3rd floors will be accessed off Rideau Street, and both basement units will be accessed off the walkway, which wraps around the perimeter of the building. The site will have 4 parking spots total with 1 accessible spot. 2 parking spots are located north of the new building off Rideau Street. The other 2 spots are located behind 5 Raglan Road and will be accessed by an easement agreement over the driveway on the neighboring property. The amenity space is split between 2 parts, a grassed area in the rear yard and a patio space behind 5 Raglan for a total of about 100 square meters or 14 square meters per unit. The outdoor amenity space is also counted as landscaped open space, and the grassed area will include landscaped elements. Vertical bicycle parking for 7 bikes and a communal garbage area will be located on the walkway between the buildings, and site design will be further refined through the impending site plan control application. Next slide. Here you can see the elevations for the proposed dwelling. The dwelling is to be 3.5 stories tall with a mix of 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units for a total of 13. The building is styled in a manner that is consistent with the surrounding built form and may be further refined through site plan control. Concerns were received regarding the incompatibility of the building's height and density in an area of predominantly 1 and 2 unit houses. Based on staff's review, the proposal meets the locational criteria for high density developments in the official plan. Also, no compatibility issues such as shadowing, overlook, visual intrusion, or architectural incompatibility are anticipated. The building is 11 meters tall, which is only 0.3 meters taller than the maximum height allowed in the current A zone. Further, the height of the proposed building will be contextually appropriate given it's across the street from Rideau Crest Home, and the building is buffered from adjacent lower density housing by the dwelling at 5 Raglan Road, the northern yard, and the adjacent roadways. Next slide, please. One of the primary concerns raised by the public is the amount of vehicle parking provided on site, which might exacerbate the lack of street parking in the neighborhood. Staff have carefully considered the issue and consider that the proposed parking rate is appropriate for the following reasons. The first is that the site has excellent access to transportation alternatives, including nearby transit stops and active transportation networks. The site is also within walking distance of parks, institutional uses, employment areas, and downtown. The applicant has also proposed 7 secured bike parking spots. The development is also consistent with the official plan direction for climate positive development to reduce carbon emissions and increase climate resilience. In this case, the reduction in parking promotes more climate-friendly forms of transportation and allows for more green infrastructure on the site, including permeable surfaces and plantings. The applicant has been made aware that long-term parking for residents is to be provided on site. And while not in effect, it is worth noting that in this area of the city, the proposed on-site parking would meet the required rates in the current draft of the upcoming consolidated zoning bylaw. We've also received concerns about increased traffic in the area, especially on Rideau Street, and that a traffic impact study should have been warranted. The application was circulated to all relevant departments, including transportation services, and it was determined that a traffic impact study would not be required. It was found that the development would not result in a disruption to the intended functionality of traffic or active transportation in the area. I also want to note 2 other concerns. The first is regarding the eviction of a current tenant. Issues between tenants and owners is not within the purview of the Planning Act and therefore cannot be considered in this application. Issues between tenants and owners is considered in the Residential Tenancies Act. The second concern is regarding potential impacts to the crosswalk over Rideau Street. No long-term impacts to the accessibility of the crosswalk are anticipated as a result of this development, and any potential short-term impacts will be mitigated through site plan control and building permit. All public correspondence can be found in Exhibit L of the report package. Next slide. The proposed zoning bylaw amendment is consistent with the provincial policy statement, conforms to the City of Kingston official plan, and represents good land use planning. The proposal meets the locational criteria for new high-density residential development. The property is within walking distance of several amenities. The development will contribute to the city's housing supply within the urban boundary, and a variety of unit types are proposed. The development provides adequate servicing, including amenity space, parking, and landscaped area. And the proposed development will be compatible with the neighborhood context and will not result in adverse impacts to neighbors. Staff therefore recommend approval of the application for zoning bylaw amendment for the site. And next slide. So next steps, if the application to rezone the property to the site-specific zone is approved, the applicant is required to obtain site plan control approval. And next slides. Any questions, comments, or concerns following the meeting can be sent to my contact information listed here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peggy. So, committee, it's over to you. Questions, comments, debate when we get it on the floor. Who would like to go first? Councillor Hutchison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is my district, as you know. There are some good things about this this proposal, including the improvement of the materiality of the buildings that will be one will remain standing, the one that will replace. However, I have some deep concerns about what this proposal does and does not do. And the first is we'll note that it's not in line with the current bylaw, which supports 1 and 2 family units in an area that is strongly 1 and 2 family units. And it's a multi-unit proposal. I have concerns about parking. The reason is in that area, a large number, my memory is that 26% of the units in the immediate area do not have on-site parking. So when we talk about this, they're in areas where, in other applications where there is on-site parking for most units. And that's not the case in this case. So when I asked staff about that, they actually didn't respond in any way that was satisfactory. And I was told the same reasons you heard tonight, which doesn't really take into account the question about on-site parking in the immediate area. So, and then I think the thing that disturbs the people in the area the most I've heard about is this current tenant eviction. The problem is that these tenants in the same unit are their family. Is that one is disabled, and they're on very low income, and they have nowhere to go. And I think we know that's a fact. Okay. Now, that's not part of the planning process, to which one of the neighboring residents supplied, then it's not good planning. And so these are the things that disturb me about this. But from the planning point of view, I think that the parking should be in line with the current bylaw, given the special circumstances of this immediate area. You can cast a net that is far too wide and takes in areas that can't adapt to that. And this is and the fact that it's contrary to the existing zone. So, I'd be interested to hear what the committee has to say about that. I mean, I know you all have to make up your own minds individually. But those are my concern, and I'll leave it at that for the moment.
Thank you, Councillor Hutchison. And I think that there are a few concerns that perhaps staff could address. So Mr. Pagey or someone else.
Yeah, thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I take Councillor Hutchison's point about the area being predominantly 1 and 2 family dwellings. The application was reviewed against official plan policies, and it was determined that by staff that it would meet those high density requirements, or the requirements for a new high density development, and that no adverse impacts would occur to any surrounding residential developments. The concerns regarding parking, I see Mr. Park has turned his camera on there, and I might pass it on to him for that.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. I would say it's appropriate, yes, Mr. Peggy, to pass the parking questions on to Mr. Park. However, I just wanted to add something to your first couple of question response there regarding is it appropriate intensification? The policies within the OP, if we're looking at intensification, do direct it toward the edges of neighborhoods, which is what this represents. It's at the end of Raglan Street and the intersection of Rideau. So we also have Rito Acres across the street and some mid-rise apartment dwellings along Rito Street. So the location in itself is appropriate, and how the property, the building is situated on the property is compatible as well. The fact the applicant also is leaving the one single family dwelling, 5 Raglan Road, as part of the proposal creates a transition zone between the proposed higher density and the existing lower density on Raglan. I think it would be very, straightforward if the proposal was being suggested mid-block on Raglan, that just wouldn't be acceptable. But because this is a corner lot, it is deemed acceptable when we go through the compatibility criteria and if it's appropriate. In terms of parking, as you're aware, the city is bringing forward a new zoning bylaw with reduced parking standards. That is in line with our climate initiatives. We looked at this application. It has very good access to active transportation, which includes bike lanes, bus routes, and its walkability. So we felt reduction to 4 spaces was a suitable amount of parking to be provided for a development of this size at this location. Thank you.
All right, Councillor Hutchison, you still have 2 minutes left in this round. Do you have anything else to say or add or ask at this time?
Sorry, I meant to turn my mic off. I think it's just that I will admit that I think, based on what I've seen, I've made a mistake about parking in the past, and that we've been able to get away with is perhaps the attitude. Not having the previous standard of parking allowance in certain other developments in my district. But this is a special situation, and I asked staff to look at that, and I didn't dictate what the answer would be, but I did not get a response, and that kind of bothers me, because for the reasons that that I gave, and because it's not a normal state of affairs. It's not a normal state of affairs compared to where I live in the district, which is a few blocks away. So there's that, and I think that, and I think that's why people in the area are edgy about that. I think the reasons given for about the changing from 1 to family unit to multi-unit, that's actually a fairly strong argument. It's really the tenant situation that's really bothered me. I think those 2 others are good reasons not to vote for this, because I don't have to vote to change the bylaw. But
that's about 5 minutes. So I saw.
Okay, that's fine.
Mr. Park, you popped up and then disappeared. Did you have extra comment to add?
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. I was just going to add to my previous comments that the applicant, in support of our parking spaces proposed, did submit a traffic that warranted that. They are also providing 7 secured bicycle parking spaces on the within the proposal, so that is equates to 1 bicycle parking spot per unit. Thank you.
Okay, looking to other members of the committee for opening comments or questions. Councillor Osanik.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So overall, I support this recommendation, but the fact that in these exceptional times of the housing crisis that we have, that's never been seen in 30 years, the newspapers say, or 30 years plus, or maybe never, there's just no affordability at all. Is there any way that that we can, like I heard what you said about evictions, and that's not under the Planning Act. So is there no way that we can do a conditional approval that the tenants have the opportunity to rent, to come back to this space?
Through you, Mr. Chair, there's no mechanism under the Planning Act that would require, make that a requirement of the applicant or make us be able to do that as a condition of approval. If the applicant was willing to do that of free will, they could do that, obviously. The other matter is under the Landlord and Tenant Act, the existing tenant could pursue their rights under that piece of legislation, which does protect tenants. Thank you.
Thank you, because with the approval of this application, we might be, contributing then to our unhoused population, right? Like it's just a really dire situation out there when somebody loses their home right now with the way the rental market is. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Osanek. Councillor Chappelle, then Councillor Hill.
I'm just following up on a comment for you, Mr. Chair. Just following up on a comment from Mr. Park. I'm just wondering if you could walk me through the process, the landlord-tenant board, if that is the case, because from what I've read in the newspaper recently, there's a substantive backlog on hearing cases. It might be 18 months before someone's heard before a landlord-tenant board. So is there anything the city can do that would help secure an opportunity for these people to have residents that they can afford while this is being built?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Unfortunately, Councillor, I am not an expert in that board or the process of that, so I would not be qualified to provide an answer that would be provide any assistance on that. I apologize.
No, fully understood. It's just you threw it out there, so I thought maybe you had some idea. Thank you.
Councillor Hill, after you.
Thank you, Chair. A couple things. First of all, is Rideau Street, would that be designated like an arterial road or a local road? Anybody?
Mr. Peggy, perhaps? Mr. Barr.
Mr. Barr.
Sorry about that long pause. Everybody, through you, Chair. Rideau Street is actually designated a local road in the official plan as well as Raglan Road.
Okay. Because it does, I guess, convey a lot of traffic through there. I don't know if that's because of Rideau Crest or access to downtown, but it does seem to me as though that this development, which I think is a good development for that area, and is compatible because that street is a fairly busy street. It does have lots of bus access. It is relatively close to downtown, so I'm not particularly maybe as concerned about the parking as Councillor Hutchison is, but then Councillor Hutchison has had to deal with a lot of parking issues in his district that I haven't had to deal with. So I bow to his expertise with respect to his own district for sure. I do think it's a relatively compatible and sort of, fits with our vision of intensification. I know that the representative for the applicant, Ms. Stuckey, is here, and I suspect that she could convey back to the proponent our concern about the tenant, and hopefully they'll make some effort to try and ensure that person is housed. But I don't think, unfortunately, that it really belongs as a part of the discussion that we're having here tonight, because we're really about planning here tonight, right? So as much as I do agree that we want to make sure that these folks are housed, that that really should take place in a different venue. But I'm sure that Ms. Stuckey will convey to the proponent our concern about that and do everything that they can to accommodate those folks. So I will be supporting this proposal.
Thank you, Councillor Hill, and very good point, Ms. Stuckey. Would you like to comment on that?
Yes, hi everyone. Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, absolutely can pass on the concerns to the owner. he is aware of the issue and has been working hard to give the current tenants as much notice as possible, and letting them know about construction timelines, and will be following all necessary procedures through the Landlord Tenant Act and through that board.
Thank you very much. And yeah, just to echo Councillor Hill, well, it pulls out our heartstrings here. The reasons for not discussing tenancy are actually quite profoundly good. It touches on human rights and the ability of either councils or developers to select who lives where, and that becomes quite tricky. And that's not what we're doing here tonight, but I'm glad that we care about people in our community, absolutely. So with the first round of questions done from committee, are there any other questions or comments at this point, or shall we move to the public? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, is anyone here to speak from the public?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you, we actually do not have any members of the public left with us this evening, so we can continue forward.
Excellent. All right, so I'll look for a motion to put this on the floor. Councillor Hill moved, seconder, Councillor Osanek. All right, so with it on the floor, there's at least 5 more minutes each if anyone would like to provide further comment or ask any further questions before we go to a vote. Councillor Hutchison, please.
Just very briefly, I just want to say to the other members of the committee, I appreciate your concerns in this way. I do not want to put you in a planning box, that's quote unquote, which we can't get out of, right? And I've explained that to a few people. It's just, what's disturbing about this is usually, it's something I think about actually, when people are evicted in order to allow for redevelopment or development, it's often assumed that they're going to find something else. And that's not an assumption we can make today, especially if you have very limited income. I think it's of concern to some residents, including the residents in this case themselves, that they enjoy living in a mixed income neighborhood, and this is not going to end up like that. This is not replacement housing in the sense that similarly income people will be in it. That would be dreaming and technical. So I just say this to make my comments more clear, and that I felt that something needed to be said. Apparently it's going to go back to the developer, but there's been back and forth between the tenant and the landlord for, I don't know, it's going on a couple of years now. Okay, so I just want to give the context for my remarks. And the parking thing I am concerned about, frankly, because of the reasons I gave. And that I leave to you to assess on an individual basis. Thank you.
Okay, seeing no other movement, it looks like we're prepared to vote. No hands going up. All right, all those in favor? All those opposed? And that passes 4-1 with Councillor Hutchison opposed. Moving on then, there are no other motions. I presume no notices of motion. No other business. Correspondence has been referenced at multiple times through the meeting and can be found online. Our next meeting is February 17th at 6 p.m. We'll look for a motion of adjournment. Councillor Chappelle, Councillor Hill seconded. All those in favor? Thank you very much, everyone. Have a great night. Thanks to staff and the public too. Take care.